All right, welcome to testing night 2. We are nearing the end, right? So it's the last lesson of our second to last week of the backend section. So we're just about halfway through the sprint. We've got 2 more testing lectures to go next week, and then it is projects week. Oh my, we have come very far. But we're kind of taking a step backwards, so to speak, tonight, because we are back in React land. So testing, this is really the first time you guys are seeing testing in any meaningful way in all the curriculum. And we talked a little bit about Jest last night and unit testing functions, which is great and all. But one thing I had mentioned that can be a challenge with front-end testing is how do you test the DOM? How do you mimic a user experience? And it turns out that it's not actually that bad to do it, but you need some tools. So that's what we're going to be exploring today. We're going to be playing a little bit with React and how to test React. So before we get onto that, one thing I wanted to mention, I got some feedback on the homework last night or 2 nights ago on the homework with the enhancements. So I know some of you guys were struggling with that, especially doing setup. The first thing I want to say is that this is a brand new assignment, so you guys are kind of guinea pigs. We're still figuring out exactly how much of that homework assignment should be the assignment versus the stretch problem. So if you were feeling overwhelmed or like you didn't get it all the way finished, that's okay. We're still trying to figure out how much of that is too much. It's an experiment. So thank you guys for bearing with us. There was also a request for me to put together a video about how to get started on that. My plan is to put that together for you guys tomorrow. I know that's a little late, but just so you guys can reference it. So I will work on that tomorrow. And I'm sorry if it almost killed you. You can take it up with Luis. He is the maniac responsible for it. All right, so on maybe a lighter note, I did want to talk a little bit about what you guys learned last night or 2 nights ago, because it's going to definitely apply to what we're talking about today. So I just want to open up the floor. Really broad question. What can you tell me about testing? After the lesson and the homework, what are some important takeaways that you guys have about testing? Testing makes the bad code go away. Ideally, yes. Test-driven is hard. It takes some getting used to, but once you get in that flow, it can actually be really easy and wonderful. You see why people skip it. Fair enough. It'll save time later. Exactly. Yep. Both in terms of, there's 2 ways to look at that. One is the most basic way, which is you invest some time writing tests up front. You save time debugging and dealing with broken code later. The other way to think about it is on your own development as a personal development as a developer, which is that you can spend time up front getting good at writing tests, and then they're going to come really easily to you later. So like any other skill, it's going to be tough when you're first learning it, but if you practice writing tests, they get a lot easier. Still fuzzy on how it integrates to an entire app. That is fair, because it can be really complex if you want an entire app with full coverage. All right, sounds like you guys have some good takeaways. So one thing I wanted to mention that didn't come up yet is this kind of basic principle, which is that you really want to test small independent chunks, at least if you're talking about unit testing, which is what we're talking about. You always want to try and test as small of a chunk as you can, and these independent chunks, so that you're really testing just one isolated thing at a time. Of course, that in and of itself won't give you full test coverage, which is why we have things like integration tests, but that's a great starting point. You don't want a big cluster of code all being tested in one go. That's another challenge, is figuring out how to isolate those things. But if you think that way, you will write good modular code. So we're now moving into testing a React app. So what do you guys think are going to be some of the challenges specific to testing a React app, or just generally testing front-end code? What kinds of things might you want to test when dealing with front-end code? And if you're a little confused about what I'm asking, just think about what you do manually. When you're writing your front-end code, What do you tinker around with in the browser to make sure that it's working all right? You definitely have to work with the virtual DOM, filling forms, user input, states. State isn't. So state is kind of interesting because it's important, but it's a little masked. So one of the things we're going to be exploring is that you really want to test front-end code as if you are an actual user. And the user is impacted by states indirectly, but the state actually is kind of invisible to the user. Server requests from the back end. We will not be covering that tonight, but that is important. Logins, functional, exactly. So really think about it like a user. You know, you want to make sure that everything renders on the page to start, that all the things you expect on the page are there. And then you want to start, quote unquote, interacting with the DOM. You want to be clicking buttons, clicking links, submitting forms, all that stuff. We really need a way to mimic a user actually tinkering around and using our app to make sure that things change and move in exactly the way we would hope when a user is really using our app. So, so that's what we're going to do. We're going to use a couple libraries to allow us to do just that. So it's going to, in some ways, look like the Jest code that we already worked with, but in other ways, we are going far beyond that tonight. All right, so let me share my screen and I will talk about the actual tools we're using. Oh yes, one thing I wanted to mention as I share my screen here. So in Training Kits, it talks about snapshot testing. We will not be talking about snapshot testing tonight. I apologize for that. I wanted to really focus on I really wanted to focus on just the regular unit testing. So snapshot testing it's actually pretty easy. So we're doing the hard part, we're skipping the easy part. I will talk about snapshot testing next week though. So I apologize, we will not get there. Just to give you a little heads up though, the gist of snapshot testing is essentially because a React component is just essentially a function with output. You take a snapshot of what that output is, and then later you run the exact same thing through it and make sure that those match. So it's a pretty easy thing to set up, but we will not be getting to that tonight. Sorry, give me 1 second. All right, so the tools we will be using. We will still be using Jest. So Jest is going to be the foundation of what we're working with. It's a test runner, so it's going to work to set up our tests and run our tests tonight just like it did on Tuesday. But it's limited in what it can do. There's nothing within Jest that's going to allow us to mimic a user experience in the way that we need to. So one popular library that we might use for this is something called Enzyme, which I believe was the Airbnb folks made it. So Enzyme is a popular tool, but we're actually not going to use it. I wanted to mention it because you'll probably hear about it, and I believe this library is built on Enzyme. But we're going to be using a fairly new library called React Testing Library. So what's super cool about this, especially in comparison to Enzyme, is that it really focuses on the user's experience. So the problem with Enzyme is that you can end up with, it almost tests the way the code is written, not the functionality. So as a user using your app, you don't care if it's written with Redux or not. You don't care exactly how state's being managed. What you care about is what happens when you click a button, what appears on screen, what is literally there on the DOM for you to work with. So this library, React Testing Library, is actually written in a way to kind of force you to think about the behavior of the app rather than the implementation. The idea being that if you decide to refactor how the code is written, remember refactor meaning different code, same function. If you decided to refactor the code, that the tests would still maintain. And that's kind of what we want from tests. We want to know about output, not about how it's written, but what it does. So that's the idea. That's why we're using React Testing Library. Enzyme's still a cool tool. You're welcome to check it out, but this is the one we will be working with. And one last thing, which is, I kind of already said this, but you could think about this library as being, it's trying to imitate that experience of that manual testing. So what you guys were used to doing in the front end section, which is you start the app, you pull it up, and you actually click around and you mess and you tinker and you see what happens. Does it work the way it's supposed to? So think about, while you're writing tests, especially in the homework tonight, think about what you would be doing as a manual tester and then write the code to mimic that. So we want this really to be just the code version of what you're used to already doing. Okay, so on that note, actually, before we go any further, we want to set up a new React app. So this takes a minute. So let's all start this process right now because it's going to take a second. So I'm just going to run my create React app commands, and we'll call this enhancement tracker. So I decided to kind of theme tonight's code along with your homework from the last 2 nights. We won't actually be looking at the logic you guys were working with already, but just thinking a little bit about how the UI might work for this. All right, so we're gonna let that do its thing. For you guys, please start this because it will, for all of us, take a minute to get together. So the next thing, while that does its thing, the next thing I wanted to talk about is how to think about a React component. So with unit testing, especially the kind of stuff you were working with, we worked with in class on Tuesday and in the homework, we really like testing functions, right? Because especially if it's a pure function, it has a nice little input and output. So we know that every time, if we put in one input, we'll get out the same output. So that makes for really nice testing. A React component might seem a little more intimidating to test than a regular old function, and it will take a little more work to set up. But remember that the essence is the same. You can still think of a React component as fundamentally being a function. It's just a function that returns a user interface of some sort. So we would expect that if we set that up the same every time, that it would return the same user interface, and thus we can write useful tests. As far as the command I just ran, where are you? Create React app, and I named it enhancement tracker. It's not critical that you name it this, but definitely want to run the create React app command. Okay, I see just a general testing question. The idea is, okay, so it's about TDD, this idea of we write tests first and then the code. The question is that how it's done in the real world? So the practice of TDD, test-driven development, specifically says, yes, you write the tests first and then the code second. As far as how it's done in the real world, that depends wildly on the developer and the team. My personal opinion is that many developers neglect writing tests. So in my personal experience, a lot of developers do not use TDD. I will tell you that I use TDD. Not every single time, but in most things, unless I have a good reason not to, I will actually write the tests first. So it is a real thing that people do. And by people, I mean at the very least me, and probably at least 3 other people out there. So yes, that is a real practice. You'll find that occasionally you'll come up with a problem where it's just creating more hassle than not. You'll also find that you frequently add more tests later as you find bugs. But even when I'm bug fixing, I'll still practice TDD. So I'll see a bug in my code and then I'll write a test that simulates that bug. So a failing test, and then I will debug with the goal that that test I just wrote passes. What you will find in practice is that many developers don't write tests or write very minimal, somewhat useless tests. And many developers who do write tests will not practice TDD. As I was kind of saying at the beginning of the lecture, it is a skill. It is awkward at first, but once you get the hang of it, it's really fun and it's really effective. So I am a huge TDD advocate, but I just might be a dork. You will probably, my experience is that I was usually on a team of developers, the person who was the craziest about tests. Occasionally I worked with someone who was more intense than me, and I always really appreciated that. But so if you go out there and you don't practice TDD, it's not going to be a shock. But if you do go out there and practice TDD, it will set you apart, both in terms of literally that you do it, but more importantly, in terms of you will write a higher caliber of code and people will notice. Okay, so I'm done with my nightly TDD spiel. I promise the TDD Society has not paid me to be here. Question of, is one person responsible for testing or many people? Generally speaking, if you write the code, you are responsible for writing the tests. That's really how it should be. And ideally how it will be, is that you are responsible for the test coverage of whatever bug you're fixing or whatever feature you're adding and so forth. All right, so let's play with this. Cool. So another thing I want to remind you guys of from last night, I'll just, where do I want to put this? And we'll put it in here. So one other thing I want to remind you of from last night is at the very end of the evening, I gave you guys this model. And this model was arrange, act, and assert. And the idea being, I hope you guys tried this out on the homework. The idea being that when you write a test, you start by arranging things, you set up anything that needs to be set up, then you act on it, that's like running the function, and then finally you assert, you actually write the test assertions. So we're gonna follow the same, idea here. So in arrange, we would any test data or anything we need to set up. Act would be, in this case, actually rendering the component. So in this arrange, act, assert, we're now for today gonna think of act as being rendering the component, or clicking a button, or inputting data into a form, whatever is happening from the user's perspective. Maybe they're just loading the page, maybe they're loading the page and doing stuff. We'll see examples of both. And then assert, we're gonna check things. You know, we're gonna check that a element contains the text we expect. We could check that it has the class we expect, things like that. We will need a little help with our assertion library, but we'll get to that when we get there. So this arrange, act, assert model is still going to apply on the front end here. All right. Okay, so we need to do a little bit of setup here. So I'd like you guys to code along with me for this setup portion. I hope all of you guys have this app pulled up. So let's start out by adding our library. So we want, it's called React Testing Library, and we'll do -- dev. Cool. And in fact, before we start to play with this thing, let's look at what's even going on here already. So notice that this React app that we generated with the create React app script, there's already a test going on here. There's already this app.test.js file here. And in fact, if I run yarn tests, that command seems to work. So we had to set this all up and one passed. So we had to do some setup last night, right? Or not last night. I don't know why I keep saying last night. 2 nights ago, Tuesday, we had to do some setup. Why is it that this yarn test worked out of the box and we already have this one test passing? What's going on here? What tools are we using? How can we confirm what tools might be being used here? This is the kind of thinking I really want you guys to do, which is when you use a command or a library, to be thinking, not taking for granted the things that kind of come out of the box. Oh, well, just is already built in. Yeah, so we could look at I love it. We could look in the package.json. So if we look in here, what we can already see is that there is a test script set up for us. The only reason we were able to yarn test is because there's a test script set up. It turns out that this Create React app already sets this up for us. We could also check inside of our node modules and confirm, if we scroll down to the J's, that we already have jest. So it turns out that this particular Create React script comes with jest and sets up the most basic test for us. So all this test is doing is renders without crashing. It's essentially saying the page successfully loads. Not a bad starting spot. There are 3 steps involved in making sure that the page loads without crashing. We have to create a div on the DOM, render our app, and then unmount it. Turns out that we don't really need to do all that because with this library we installed, hopefully you guys already installed this. I'll just go ahead and post this in Slack. I want you guys to definitely install this library because life is about to get even easier. Just posted that command in Slack. Oh, and one other thing I want to do real quick here. On this test script, I'm just going to add a -- verbose. This will just make our tests a little, it's going to display a little more info about our tests. It'll be useful as we go through the night. So make sure you add that dependency, that dev dependency, and then just go ahead and do this verbose thing. I'll even post this in Slack too. So I will give you guys a sec to catch up on this. --dev versus -D, 2 ways of doing the same thing. And if any of you guys have the test already running, I would actually exit out and restart it. If you want to use this verbose command, you'll have to actually quit and rerun yarn test, which I will do right now. All right. So let's go ahead and refactor this using our new library. So we will not need React DOM anymore. Still passing? All right, let's scroll that down. We don't need React DOM anymore. We do want a method called render. It's going to come from React testing library. This will allow us to render and it will actually auto unmount it for us. So we can get rid of all of this. I'll comment it out actually. And you'll see how much easier it is. We can do this with 1 line now. So all we have to do is render and pass in our app. Done. Same thing, way easier. So let's make sure this is still passing. Looks good. All right, so that's interesting, or it's not interesting. Actually, this is not interesting at all. It's good that it's passing, but this is the most boring test in the world. So let's take a look at our app.js code. There's some stuff going on here. So we don't only want this page to load, we'd like to be able to test and make sure that it's loading the way we think it's going to load. So just looking at this React code here, what's something we could test for? Something really simple. Any ideas, guys? What might we, and once again, think about if you were just loading this page in the browser, what might you look for to confirm that the page matches what's on here? A tag or the logo. Yeah, all good things. We might want to check that the logo appears, that the paragraph appears, that the anchor appears, really any of these things. I'm going to go ahead and check the anchor. So we could check a couple things with it. We could check that there is an anchor. We could check that it has the right class name, that it has the right href, that it has the right text. So let's start by actually grabbing this anchor, and we'll also confirm that it has the expected text in it. So let's go over here. I'm going to wrap this all in a describe, just to practice that. So this is just the same jest stuff we were doing 2 nights ago. We're going to be testing a different component later in the night, so we might as well wrap it in describe. So we'll go ahead and play with this anchor. So our first step is going to be very similar. We want to use this render function. But it turns out that this not only renders the app, but it will actually return to us an object, this component object. And the component object has all sorts of useful methods on it. Sorry, let's get rid of that for a second. Okay, so, and you know what, to start, let's just go ahead and console log it so we can see what it is. It's going to be ugly, but it's always nice to know more or less what we're working with. All right, come on back. So, like I said, this component contains all these crazy methods that will allow us to do essentially anything we want to do. What we want to do right now, though, is there's these get bys. This is not alphabetized, which is kind of annoying. So we could do get by value, get by text. I believe there is I really want get by element, but there might not be one. Oh, well, let's just do get by text. Easy enough. So components. And we know that this anchor says learn React. And then we could go ahead and store this thing in here. So right now we're still doing the in this this model of arrange, act, assert. We're kind of doing a combination of acting and arranging here. So we're loaded the page, and then we selected the anchor, and now we're going to start to assert some stuff about it. So let's go ahead and go expect HTML to be learn React. All right, I think I've set that up correctly. Let's pull our test back up and see what happens. These, I think this ran. Let's try again. All right, it's working. It's rendering correctly, and we can even confirm that one of the elements on there contains the text that we expect. So a couple things to think about, actually just one thing to really think about, is that we care a lot more about the text than we do the tag name. We wouldn't, in this kind of spirit of think about it like we're actually a user using the app. The user doesn't care if it's an anchor or a div or a span. The user cares about what the text says. So that's really the kind of stuff we like to check for, that we like to test for, is that really tangible stuff. On that note, we don't want to get too intense about literally what things say. So for example, if we were to change this code to say learn React, our test is going to fail now. But from the user's perspective, has anything meaningful really changed? From the user's perspective, it's slightly different, but meaningfully, it still just says learn React. So one thing we like to do, and this is actually recommended by the library itself, is use regex. So we can go ahead and change that. So this little I at the end says that we do not care about case. Oh, unless oh wait, we can't use to be with regex. Okay, let's actually, I will give you guys a chance to catch up in a second. This is a good opportunity for us to add one more tool into our tool belt. So the next tool, so this assertion stuff, when it comes to the DOM, there's a couple extra methods we kind of wish we had. And sorry, give me 1 second. Okay, so can I slightly explain regex? Sure. I feel like I'm doing a million things at once here. So let's pause. Let me just comment this out for right now and talk about regex. So regex could be its own series of lectures. It's a deep, deep well, but essentially it's a matching syntax. So it's a way, using slashes and other symbols, it's a way of saying, don't look for exactly this string, but a string that matches this to some degree. So we could, for example, if we were looking for social security numbers, we know that social security numbers are going to be this form. So if we were specifically looking for something that had number, dash number, dash number, we could write a regex expression to match things like that. So I don't want to bog you guys down with regex because it can get very confusing, but all I will say is that this here, what this means, what I've specifically written, and the only thing you'll need to know for tonight's lecture is that I am looking for any text that says learn React with any sort of case sensitivity. So I could do some really obnoxious stuff over here, and it would still consider this to be a match because the letters are there. It just doesn't care about case. All right, I see a couple other questions. So let's slow down and get you guys all caught up. All right, so first question is, how did the tester get started? The Create React app added Jest out of the box. So the only thing we added was this React testing library. We added that as a dev dependency. But Jest, which we're using as our test runner, was already there just by running that Create React app command. On that note, how did we get render to work? Make sure that you are importing render from the React testing library. You still need to import the app, but apart from that, if you're importing render from this library and the library has been added, it should work. What does the I represent in regex? It says ignore case. I think it stands for ignore. So essentially what it's saying is any text that if you lowercased it matches this is valid. Doesn't matter what you put on the outside. Levi, could you rephrase that question? I'm not quite sure you're asking. I don't know if there is to match in just. Let's find out. Still not, I'm sorry, I'm still not quite understanding your question. Oh, the it. It and test are interchangeable. Oh, no, what are you doing? Sorry. Foiled again. It and test are interchangeable. You can do either way. Looks like there is a to match. Nice. Well, okay. Before I move on, let me do a poll. Feel free to keep asking questions if you guys still have questions, but I'm going to do a poll to make sure that we're all ready to move on. All right, I'm not seeing any disagrees, so let's go ahead. Yeah, I agree that regex would be a great brown bag. I kind of assumed that it'd come up at some point along the way, but that's a little disappointing to hear that it hasn't. And don't arbitrarily click disagree, please. We have stuff to do. All right, so one other library that I want to throw in the mix here is actually, let me keep my test going. All right, so there's a library called JustDOM, and essentially will allow us to just do more cool stuff with the DOM in our testing. So why not? All right, yarn add JustDOM, another dev dependency. Let's do it. So you guys should also be running this command. Cool. And then we can just go ahead. All right, so I'll give you guys a second. I don't know why that. I feel like this is getting away from me today. I'll give you guys a second to yarn add this and then import this extend expect piece of it up here. This is just going to allow us to use even more matchers. All right, question about arrange, act, assert. So arrange is any sort of setup we have to do. So setup would be, we're really not arranging in these examples, but if we had to create, on the homework, you guys were probably creating these mock items. That would be the arrange part, if you have to create any sort of mock data. The act part is where you actually simulate the thing you want to test. So for us, these lines would be the act. We're actually loading the page and taking a look at a specific element. And then the assert is our expect statements. That's the actual things we're testing. So we've kind of skipped the arrange step in this test because there really isn't much to arrange, but it's just a model that will help us to write more complicated tests. As far as the slash syntax goes versus using brackets, I'm not 100% sure on that one. You'd have to try it out. I'm very rusty on React, so sometimes I'm not the best person to ask even fairly simple React questions. You're welcome to try it out though, and if it works, let us know. All right, so let's refactor this. We now don't even have to worry about inner HTML. There's actually some new methods built in here. So one of those that we will be using a handful of times tonight is going to be to have, look at all these things, all these wonderful things we have to work with now. To have text content. So now we can put in a regex statement or a string, whatever we want. Let's make sure this is still working. Nice. All right, so what I want you guys to do is write another test. Just take a minute to write another test for this app component. You can test whatever you want. Probably wouldn't test the anchor since we've already done it, but there are a number of other components. You can mimic this and just test the text content of a different element if you want, or if you wanted to play around with trying to test for a class or something like that, you're welcome to that as well. So I'm going to give you guys 5 minutes to try to add another test here, just to practice this. So let me set that timer up and have at it. Oops, start. Now I'll put this code up for you. All right. I'm trying to do 3 things at once. For Jonathan and Angela, I will continue to try and help you guys debug this when we go on break, which I know kind of sucks because you'd probably rather have a break. One thing I want to say to you guys is just try yarn add, just try running yarn add React DOM and see if that works. I don't know why the problem would happen in the first place, but that's a bummer. We'll see if we can work that out. Question of, is there a list of methods I can review somewhere? It depends on if you are talking about component methods or extra matchers like this. So the component methods would all be on the documentation for this React testing library. I will post that link there. Those will tell you all the methods that you can run off of the component. If you are curious about what extra matchers we have, I don't have those docs pulled up, but I bet we can find them real quick. Let's see. I don't know how good the docs are for this. I haven't really looked at it. Cool. There's a list of those. So. All right, to answer the question of, is that a Casio keyboard? Yes, it is a Casio keyboard, and it belongs to a friend of mine while I wait for my very, very awesome SV1 piano to arrive, which is going to be super classy and will be in the background of our final lectures. By the way, if you guys haven't noticed, I have done some rearranging of my house, and now my teaching space is in a different room, hence the different background and different wall color. Oh, you have the same one. Nice. All right, cool. So I think that unless you guys have some other questions, I will actually do a break right now. And then when we come back, we're going to build a new, more complex component and do some more interesting tests. So I will continue to try and help Jonathan, you debug this and see. The only other thing I would say is just delete everything and start from scratch with Create React App. You could try npx instead of running Create React App. There's a chance you might not have the most recent version of it installed, which could create a problem. So you could try running npx Create React App and see if that solves it. That's my best idea. Let's see. I have a question about the contains an image. Okay, let's see. I haven't really worked much with images, so we'll kind of let's tinker around with it for a minute and then we'll go on break. So I'm gonna just go ahead and copy on over this new test. So it contains an image. And okay, so I think that the issue here is that this expects to have text context is looking for actual text, not alt text. So let's see if there is something. Where is that link? Let's see if there's something in here about actually matching alt text. If not, we can probably figure it out. I don't see any alt text thing. So here's what we can do. Let's go ahead and console log this image to see what DOM element is coming through. This is I think a worthwhile thing to play with. Uh-oh. Let's see. Why aren't you? There it is. All right, so this is just some very obnoxious DOM element. So I haven't done DOM stuff in so long. Let's try this out. Check alt text on I'm not seeing. Okay, that's what I want. .alt. Okay, let's see what happens when we do image.alt. Man, these tests take so long. Oh, why isn't my console log appearing? Well, I don't know if this will work or not, but we could just go ahead and try doing expect image.alt to match. Well, image.alt is not working. So I am at a loss on how to write an alt text test. I would have to do some Googling around to figure that one out. I'm still glad that you guys, I know it kind of sucks that I said go off and do your own thing, and then I'm like, all right, we're just moving on. I do want to make sure we get to the other stuff I want to cover tonight. So maybe while you're on break, I'll play around and see if I can figure this one out. But let me go ahead and, oh wait, did someone figure it out? Yeah, so you could do, that's a good starting point. You could do expect it to be defined. All right, I am going to let you guys go on break though now, because we are getting behind schedule. So 5-minute break. I'll try not to be too distracting, but I'm definitely going to play around with this while we're on break. It doesn't like you naming it IMG, apparently. Because it just worked for me when I renamed this variable logo. Imagine that. All right, welcome back. So we have this app component, but we've named this thing enhancement tracker, and I wanted to play a little bit with a sort of vaguely potential UI for the homework that you worked on already this week. So I think we need a new component and a new test file. So let's start out by creating a new folder called items. Come on. And then within that, we'll do a file called items.js and a file called, I will give you guys a chance to catch up on all this, test.js. So I'll give you guys a sec just to create that folder in those files. All right, so let's put some fun stuff in here. So starting with this guy, I'll just go ahead and do import React from React. We'll set it up as a class. We will want to have state. And let's just do a very basic render. All right. I think I got everything I want here. Do I have? This is, oh, oops, my bad, good catch. This does not go on our test file. This is just our items. So I'll give you guys a sec to catch up on this one. Actually, let me just go ahead and split this, and we will start our test file. So our test file, it's going to look, might even just steal all these guys from the top. And then we would want a describe. We don't want app, we want. Sorry, I'm all over the place. And someone is not muted. Sorry. Let's export this. Yeah. Now I'm going fast. I will let you guys catch up with all of this. Let's just do. All right, let's see if this passed. Oh, no, it doesn't. What have I done wrong? Well, I'm going to name this the same for convention's sake, but it won't help. Can also change this to test, but that should not matter. Can anyone see what I have done wrong here? Flash items. We exported items. We shouldn't have to do ... because we're in the same folder. And we also don't have to save this as anything. We should just be able to run it. Wait, oh, it's passing now. That is one thing I've noticed about Jest, is that sometimes it will start running and then not rerun for the most updated. So occasionally it's, if you're confused about why something's not working, just try resaving and it might be this. Okay. Okay, so we have the boilerplate here for both our new component and our new testing code. So let me give you guys a sec to catch up on that. Only the app test is running. Did you name items dot this has to be either something dot test.js or something dot spec. We have not we have not passed the items compose. We haven't mounted it anywhere, but it turns out that we actually don't need to. Right now, this is kind of a disembodied component, but to test it, we don't even need to. As long as we import it in here, this will sudo mount it for us. So that's kind of a cool thing, is we can have a disembodied component like this and still test it. Items.js is already pulled up. That's what we have right over here. Oh, one thing, Christopher, that you might try is make sure that verbose is set. If so what I would do if you're not seeing the tests is I'll even show you what this looks like. So if we go ahead and go into, where is my package JSON, and get rid of this verbose flag. Let me run this again. Notice this doesn't really give us, it tells us that it ran both items, but it doesn't really give us a breakdown of everything that passed and failed. So that's why we want to keep that verbose flag in there. So if you're not seeing exactly what I'm seeing up here, I would add this and restart your tests. Why does it only show items first and then, as far as order goes, I think it's just the order that you see in here. I think it's alphabetized. Well, I don't know why it's displaying it in the order it is. Is there a way to mute everyone? Yes, and I already did mute everyone. So if you're hearing chatter, I don't know where it's coming from. I think maybe there's something coming through your browser. All right, I'm kind of assuming everyone's at this stage. If there's any, oh God, please helps on setting this up before we move on, speak now. As far as how you would grab the class, we'll have to move on from that one. If you want to reach out to me directly after class, we can explore that together, but you don't really need to know how to do that for this. The short answer is, I guess I'll take it just a second. The short answer is that make sure that you're looking at React testing library, not just DOM. So there should be, where did I see the list of the docs? Here we go. Yeah, so this is where you would want to go to, I'm really not super familiar with these, all these methods are defined here. So I bet we can find something that has to do with class. I don't know, you'd have to play around in here, but my guess is there's something in here that'll help you out. All right, moving along. So I want to talk to you guys about the data test ID now. So over, and I'm going to switch these orders. This is, okay. All right. So I am going to put on something called the data test ID. So kind of like a regular ID, this is a way of identifying an element, but this data test ID attribute is specific to testing. So if we want to add a way of identifying an item without worrying about affecting our HTML or CSS, this is a good way to go. And it's an easy way for us to select items now. So I've added this test ID thing onto this div called items. So let's go ahead and create a new test for this thing. All right, so we'll do test. Displays the title. Okay. So we always want to start with grabbing our components. And then what we can do is we can actually use this component get by test ID and just pass that on in. And then now if we wanted to confirm what it says, we could always do, or sorry, expect. Oh, let's save that. And I'll use that regex thing again, because. All right, let's make sure it works. I might even, honestly, I'm just gonna comment out these app tests right now, just they're not slowing us down as we work on this. Come on. Save. I said save. So the big takeaway here, this is really similar to what we've already done. The big takeaway here is that there's this really cool get by test ID method that's just a nice go-to way to grab a specific element. All we have to do is actually add the data test ID on, and then we can be assured that we'll successfully grab our element correctly. It's yelling at me because my test suite doesn't contain one test. That's okay. Would the test ID need to be deleted before production? No. That's what's really nice about this, is because you would never use data test ID for anything else. So it's okay that it's there. All right. So let's let's add some states. We want a way of keeping track of all of our items. The idea here is that we're going to display some of these fantasy items and have a way of upgrading them. None of our fancy upgrade logic will be included, but you can use your imagination. So for laziness sakes, I have some sample items over here off screen. I'm going to just copy these over. And I will, if you guys want, throw those in Slack too, so that you don't have to type them out. I'm still trying to figure out if I spelled gauntlet right or not. So if I did not spell gauntlet right, please let me know. Maybe I'll just Google that. It's a good life skill, or a good piece of knowledge to have, is how to spell gauntlet. You never know. Yep, looks good. Cool, so we now have an array of some nice items with enhancement scores and with some unique IDs. All right, so if we were doing this in true TDD form, we would write our test first. But I think because we're still learning this and it gets a little hairy, that I will actually write the React code first. This is a case where I would write the code first and then the test afterwards, because we're juggling a lot of things right now, getting comfortable with this. So let's go ahead and display, do a little mapping and display these items on here. So I want to do a little bit of that. And then underneath this, we will do a all right, and I'm going to, how do you want to set this up? We definitely want a key, so we can do i.id for that, a unique identifier for each of these guys. And then let's go ahead and do div with i.name, and then we'll do another one with the enhancement score. All right, so using our imagination, remember this is right now kind of this disembodied component, but if we were to render this in the browser, we would have a div up top that said items. We could even, I mean, this is basically a header, so let's just make this an H3. Notice that changing this from a div to an H3 should not break our tests, which is good because from a user's perspective, they really don't care. Well, it shouldn't break our tests. Yep, so far so good. Because from the user's perspective, it doesn't really matter if this is a div or an H3. So we'd have this header that says items, and then this list of 3 items it would contain, which would contain both the name of the item and the enhancement score. So if we want to be able to track these things a little easier, we could always throw some data test IDs on here too. We could call this item. Call this enhancement. All right. So these IDs are not going to work quite as well because now we have a list, but when we select, we'll be able to, it'll just grab the first one from the list. So I want you guys to, I'm going to give you guys a few minutes to go off on your own. I want you guys to write test displays first item. So write a test here that checks to make sure that this first item is rendering that it is this longsword. So you could just check that this div contains the text longsword. If you wanted to add another assertion, you could also check the enhancement equals 4. Might be nice to do both. So I'll give you guys 5 minutes to work on that. This will also just give you a chance to catch up. Maybe I'll give you a little longer so you have a chance to catch up on all this code. I know I just, you know what, we're a little low on time. Let me just copy this over. You guys already know how React works. So I'm just gonna copy over the return inside of my render. Let's just copy the whole render function. I don't want you guys wasting time with this. I want you writing tests for it. So I'm sticking with 5 minutes. You have my render function. Go ahead and write a new test for it. And use this getByTestID method. Okay, let's do this all together. I'm just gonna actually pillage this code from up here. Slide this over. All right, so first I want to get this item. And I'm expecting this thing to be a longsword. Maybe 5 minutes was too much for you guys. But that's good. If you guys got done in minute 1 and were twiddling your thumbs, that's always a good sign. And then we'll call this item, sorry. And then this one we will call, I'm just gonna call it score actually. And we expect this one just to be 4. All right, let's see if that worked. We really want all our asserts at the together. All right, let's try it out. Looks like it's passing. So you're able to grab both of these guys, and remember that there are more than one elements with this ID on it, but we're really just grabbing the first one. Maybe not the most sophisticated thing, but it at least shows you guys in general what's happening here. So, okay, and we've confirmed that the item is longsword and that it has this enhancement score of 4. So that's cool. But now I want things to get really interesting. So let me throw on one more element on here, which is a button. This is going to say enhance. So now we imagine that it's rendering this list of items and each one has this enhance button. I bet you guys know where I am going with this. We want to test something a little more interesting now than just, does it display? What does it display? We want to see what happens when the user interacts with the app. So this is kind of the moment we've been leading up to here, is we're actually going to simulate a button click. So let me go ahead and test. And what we really want is that you click this button and the enhancement score goes up. Of course, it's a little more complicated than that if we actually had that convoluted back-end logic about how enhancements happen, but we'll assume right now that it all enhances every time. So enhancement button increases score. That's what we want to see. So we are going to do a little TDD now. We're going to write a failing test here. Because right now this button isn't hooked up to anything. This button isn't going to do diddly squat, but that's fine. So we'll start with our component. And then we could go ahead. How could we actually, I'll open this up to you guys. We need to grab that button somehow. What have we seen already that would allow us to, what component method would allow us to find that button? We could add a test ID. Let's try something else though, something we saw at the very beginning. I'll even open this back up to remind you guys. I was thinking of get by text. So if we feel confident that this thing's going to have the text enhanced, we can always do, oops, that's not what I want. Component.get by text. And we'll do a regex here. Enhance. All right, so now we're going to see something we have not yet seen, which is we need to fire an event. So this fire event thing is something else we can import from our testing library. So make sure that you go up and you add fire event up here next to render. We want to import that. And then we can actually do, oops, sorry, fire event. And there are different events we can, let's actually see. So these are all the events that we might want to look at, all the stuff that we can do. So this is where it gets really exciting, because now with fire event, we really can simulate a user interacting with our page. But let's start with the simplest thing, which is clicking a button. So ta-da, we have used our library to create a virtual button click. And then what do we want to test? What should our assertion be? Once again, this isn't going to happen yet because we haven't hooked up our button to anything, but what are we expecting to see on a button click? Remember, we want this enhancement to increase the enhancement score on this item. So what lines of code would we need here to round out this test? It's very similar to something we wrote in the last test. Exactly. We expect the score to be 5 now. So we have to grab our score. We can just steal this line of code and steal this line of code. But now we expect it to be 5. So something has changed. And that's really cool, right? Because in our last test, this was equal to 4. But now we see that once the user interacts, and we could even fire another click, and then we could fire 2 clicks and see if it went up to 5. But or up to 6. But let's start here. So we'll save this. We should be in TDD form having a failing test right now. We should be seeing that what we expect to be 5 right now is still just 4. Uh-oh. Yep, so this one's failing, and we sure enough see that we expected 5, received 4. Now let's go over to React land and fix this. All right, so we need an on click. We will set that up here. And let's go ahead and create a method called enhance item. And we want to actually pass the item in. We could even just call this enhance because the I is the item. Ooh, now this is freaking out. Okay, I'm going to put that away for now. So it's freaking out, right? Because this .enhance does not exist. We can fix that though. So we'll define it down here. It's going to take in an item. And there is probably a more sophisticated way to set this up that you React experts know. But if we want to get real simple, right, because we can do this item.enhancement ++, that changes our state, but it doesn't, because we didn't use set state, that doesn't trigger anything to update. So this will still fail. So while I'm sure that this is not the preferred way to do this on the React side, I'm going to keep the React part of this real simple because we care the most about tests right now. I'm going to not update Freudian slip of some sort. Okay, so I'm going to call force update to make sure that not only does our enhancement score increase, but that our what this re-renders to reflect that. All right, what do you think, guys? Do you think our test is passing yet, or have we forgotten anything important here? What I just did makes you upset. Send me the right way to do it. I was researching this earlier, and I was like, this looks convoluted and complex. I'll just do a force update. Don't use me as, there's a reason I'm teaching this backend stuff. I'm definitely not a React. Well, the problem with set state is that we don't know which can you plus a string. You can't, but remember enhancement is not a string. So the reason that I can't do a regular set state is because we have no guarantee. Another way I could do this, which would be hacky in a different way, is I could update the first item on here but we don't know that it's going to be the first item. We don't know which item it's supposed to be. So it's actually kind of a sophisticated thing. I'm sure there is a way to do it. I just don't know what it is, and I apologize. Louis has shamed me. I'm embarrassed of myself in my React coding now. But let's see if the test passes. It does. All is forgiven. This horrible force update is forgiven, right? Right, guys. So, did it? Where is my? Let me get this to run again. Yep. So the enhancement button increases the score. So even though we did a horrible, horrible thing in React land, we did successfully simulate a button click. So that's exciting. How did I get it to click? Great question. So let me move things around here. So the first thing we need to simulate a click or any other sort of interactive thing is this fire event. So up here when I'm importing my React testing library, I need to not only import render, but this fire event. That is step one. Then down here, we can do fire event dot click. There are a bunch of different methods on fire event, but we want click and then just pass in that button component. Any other questions about this event firing business? Nope. Well, that is actually all I have for you guys with this React stuff. We have a little extra time. I wanted there to be a little extra time because I know there were maybe a number of questions about the homework last night, or the last homework. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to show you the homework for tonight. I then want you guys to ask any questions you have on this React testing stuff. Let's start with questions about tonight's lecture. And then with any extra time we have, we can talk about the last homework, this actual enhancement homework. So let me show you guys your homework for tonight. And I'll just go ahead and send you guys the link right now. There you go. So very similar to what we've done here. Basically, you're doing a baseball simulator where you're displaying this balls and strikes and it updates and so forth. So same kind of deal as the last homework where we've given you this minimalistic description of what we want. And it's up to you to create this front end and to test it. So really be thinking when you're testing this, really be thinking about using the app. What does the user care about? The user doesn't care necessarily if it's a div or a header. The user probably doesn't care about if it's capitalized or not. The user cares about what displays, what happens when you click a button. So really be focusing on that most surface level use stuff. And luckily this library that we've been using kind of forces you to do just that. So here's the homework. Good luck with it. Make sure you're trying to think of good words of wisdom here. Try to use state better than I did. Don't force update like I did. Don't be a horrible React developer. I'll talk to Dan. I'll let Dan school me on how to properly do this. Code shaming. There's going to be like PSA, you know, in 20 years when everyone's a developer, there's going to be PSAs about code shaming and how our youth is growing up in a culture of code shaming and it's interfering with their self-esteem. All because of force updates. All right, so do you guys have any code bullying? It's real. Do you guys have any questions about this specifically? Not about the last homework yet, but about anything we covered tonight? And then there'll be like this whole counter movement of like people on the internet who are like, I'm proud of my bad code. I'm proud that I have no tests. Like, I'm using a set timeout to handle async stuff, and I own it. All right, we have wondering why my fire event code won't pass. I think I will need to see your code or get a little more information in order to help you out with that one. Sorry, looking at this code. Okay, so let me pull this up on my screen so you guys can see this when you're watching this later. I'm actually glad you mentioned this because this is a subtle point. So okay, so the difference here is, I will give you a hint. The score is being grabbed in a different spot than on my code. Why does this matter? Why does it matter when we grab this score component? Does anyone have an idea why this might be breaking this particular test? Come on, guys. I've pointed you to the guilty line of code. Why is this the guilty line of code? You need to grab it after the event fires, exactly. So this is what this line of code is doing, is it is grabbing what's currently on the DOM and then freezing it into JavaScript form. So we've grabbed it and frozen it before the event's ever fired. So we're looking at the score as it was before the event fire. So this is I'm actually really glad this came up because this is a really easy point to get tripped on at the beginning. Make sure that whatever you're checking that's going to be impacted by an event, that you're actually grabbing it after the event fire. That will fix it. All right. Any other questions about this stuff? Any other questions before we start talking about the crazy homework? No. Okay. I know that there was one question about handling thrown errors. If you want to, I don't remember exactly what that question was. If you want to repost that question, I can take a look at that. If anyone, by the way, anyone who feels like totally solid on the homework, you guys are welcome to drop out of the lecture right now and go ahead and get started on the homework. No reason to stick around unless you're curious about this. I'm going to actually open this math project that we were working on Tuesday. Getting a declaration exception. So I can go over how to catch errors, but Angela, I would actually, if you could post the code that you're having the problem with in Slack, that would probably help us a lot. All right, let me get reoriented here. I don't actually have a copy of the homework completed anywhere on my computer, so we're kind of gonna have to wing it here. So the most important piece when you're doing this expect to throw business is you can't just call the function. You have to actually wrap it in an anonymous function like this, and then changing all the throws to undefined to bypass that error. Can you guys send me, I'm not quite sure what's going on. Can you guys send me some screenshots of your code and the error that you're getting? Actually, while you guys get that together, I'm gonna go grab some water. I will be right back. Okay, so let's see if I can kind of hack this together real quick. So I know this is not a math function, but bear with me. So we'll create this repair item. Type of stability equals number. We return the item. Okay. Else through new error. All right, let's try it out. Okay, and then we'll do math test. So we'll start out with a sorry, trying to recreate this from the help channel. Thank you for your patience, guys. So based on the test I'm seeing, let me actually, sorry, give me a second. See if I can pull up the actual homework. All right, so repair, we're talking about repairing. I'm curious, what requirement are you even trying to satisfy here? Like, failed requirements. Okay, cool. I'm not seeing anything about, I mean, I'm looking at what I saw posted in WEBPT2 help, which was about trying to repair an item, but the durability isn't a number. And I'm not actually seeing where that requirement was coming from. Just checking that was a valid input type. So I know that man, I might have gotten myself in over my head trying to help you guys out with this one. Okay, so I can see, Angela, in your code, I can see what's going on. So let's start there. Sorry about fumbling about. So let me just copy on over what Angela has posted and we can talk about the issue. All right, so I won't be able to run this because I don't have everything set up for it, but we can still talk about what's going on. So if these throws errors, for example, so, okay, I see. So you're setting this to be an anonymous function, and it still doesn't work. Oh, put cell function in here. Type cannot fail. Okay, so this should throw if it's armor and the. All right, well, let's play with that. So I'm going to try and create this chest guard here. So type is armor. And what else did we want? And enhancement is 3. Okay, let's see if this works. So we're setting result 12 equals. So I wouldn't, I mean, it's kind of arbitrary, but it will help you understand what's going on. I wouldn't call this a result because it's not a result, it's a function. So I'm just going to call this fail attempt because that's really what it is we're attempting to trigger a failure. We'll pass that in. And let's see if it works. All right, so. Oh wait, I have to. Also, Venki, you're trying to grab your button by get by text items. Make sure that what you're passing into get by text actually matches the text on the button, because what you're calling a button right now isn't really a button. All right, let's see if we can. So yeah, and Jesse, you're correct that we don't care about when to send an item into a specific function, but we do have to send items in order to test it. And if it's, for some of these rules, if it's saying this should never be able to fail, then when you attempt to throw a fail in, it should throw an error. So let's see if we can test this now. What's going on? Syntax error. 57. Too much copying and pasting. What have I done? All right. That looks good. This should be there. And no, that's not right. This is what happens when I try to do difficult things at the end of class. Still have, there's something going on here. All right. That's good. That's good. That's good. Seems okay. Okay. Unexpected. Yeah, syntax error on the other one. Right. Try again. Function did not throw. What went wrong? On fail. If item is armor and the enhancement is less than 5. Line 31. I'm missing something here. The type is armor and the enhancement is less than 5, right? Did I spell enhancement right? My gosh. I can't even get an error to throw properly. First the force update, now this. Oh, I spelled enhancement wrong. That's the issue. Or someone else spelled enhancement wrong. One of us spelled enhancement wrong, I think. Doesn't matter as long as they're the same. Okay. Still didn't throw. Just gonna copy this over. Oh my God, I'm sorry, guys. Okay, enhancement. It's supposed to be painful to watch. I should have stopped recording. Why can't I get this thing to throw? My goodness. You're talking to me about cursed code. All right, we're gonna get real primitive here. So type check. Let's try this out. That's so weird. It's like it's not. I wonder if there's some sort of issue about saving this anonymous function. I don't know what it could be, but let's just try that out. Nope, same issue. Well, okay, no, fine, there's a rogue. Well, I am just completely at a loss, and I think that my brain might be powering down. I'm really sorry. I would love to look at your code when it is after I've gotten a full night of sleep. So if you want to send me, if you want to delete your node module, zip up your code, send it to me, and I will take a look at it. I feel like I need, for my own personal sake, redemption after my utter failure to even get this to throw an error here. And then I will put together a video for you guys tomorrow just showing you some basic setup on this. So apologies for probably wasting 20 minutes of your time. But at the very least, hopefully the takeaway is that all of us struggle with this stuff. Anything else you guys want or need from me before we call it good? You're like, no, just go away. All right, guys. Good luck with the homework tonight, and I'll post that video tomorrow, and I will see you guys on Monday for our final week. All right. Bye, guys.